All right. Hello, History 6 or History 262. This is Mr. Pierce. I'm your instructor. Not the dulcet voice of Alicia Tucker, who you've been listening to on your other mini lectures. She's the one that created the course and recorded those mini lectures, but I'm adding this as a little filling in the gaps. The nature of our course, history through film, we have to pick a certain number of films, and we jump through history pretty quickly and miss a lot of stuff. And ironically, one of the things that we miss in this course is a history of the art of film itself. We spend our time talking about history as it's portrayed in film, but never get around to really talking about the history of how this actually developed. So the purpose of this slideshow is to go back and talk a little bit about that. It's not graded. You don't have to watch it, but I hope it gives some of you some insights on how the art of film developed. I'm going to be dealing with the art of film up until the 1930s, when sound was integrated into the film itself. And I'll stop there. So this is the early history of film, not the complete history of film. Before we talk about the history of movies or film, I think it's important to bring up the question, what is a movie exactly? Because when people say who invented the first movie or who made the first movie, it always comes down to, what do you call a movie? And it's a really difficult thing to answer that question, because there's so many different people who invented small pieces of the technology and art form that we call movies today. No one person invented the whole thing whole cloth. But the first person we need to talk about is Daguerre. Daguerre is a Frenchman who invented a method of recording photons, that is, photography, using what he called the daguerreotype. And it was a very expensive, very slow process. You had to have a copper metal plate coated in silver, fogged over with all kinds of different chemicals and stuff. And you had to expose it for minutes at a time. On a bright, sunny day, you could get away with, about 10 to 20 seconds. But a lot of people had to hold really still for minutes at a time to take a good daguerreotype. This picture we're looking at here is a picture out of Daguerre's apartment window in Paris. And you'll see that there is a guy right down here getting his shoes shined. It looks like nobody else is on the street. In fact, there were people walking up and down the street. But because this is a long exposure, all those people just fade away. You can't even see them. The only guy that shows up is this guy who was holding still for a few minutes there. Well, it's expensive. It takes a long time. It's not really the right technology for a movie, but there are some very famous daguerreotypes out there. If you see some of the early photography, a lot of them were created through daguerreotype technology. Here's one of Abraham Lincoln before he had a beard. Another famous one of John Brown, the famous anti-slavery crusader, of Bleeding Kansas fame, which hopefully you read a little bit about in your textbook leading up to the Civil War. But people immediately began to try to improve upon this technology using less expensive materials. This photograph is the first photograph taken of using paper film rather than a metal plate. So William Talbot produced that, and you were able to reproduce the image because you created a negative that then could be reproduced over and over again. So that was a good invention. As people worked on this, refined the chemical process, by the late 1800s, the process had become so much better that the exposure times were fractions of a second rather than minutes. And another important invention comes along in 1885, and that is celluloid. Celluloid is a petroleum-based plastic. It's a thin film that's durable, that's waterproof. It can be coated in chemicals, and it was a great medium for capturing pictures. So George Eastman, an American, invented that and started the Kodak film company. And the celluloid film became the medium of choice for photographers going forward. All right, but by this time now you have a technology that is able to capture multiple pictures in a very quick succession. And so you're set up now with this technology to create motion. All right, so here we have a motion picture. Yes, is this the first movie? I would ask you, well, again, what is a movie? Does a movie have to tell a story? Does it have to be seen by an audience? Does it have to be shot on a movie camera? Well, those are all questions that people argue over. But in this case, Edward Muybridge did not use a movie camera. He used 24 separate cameras that he set up along the racetrack and took 24 separate pictures of Sally Gardner, that's the name of the horse, galloping along the racetrack. And he did this not because he was a cinematographer, not because he was trying to make a movie or a motion picture, but because he was trying to settle a debate. There was a long-standing debate amongst horse enthusiasts and horse racers that the debate was whether or not horses got all four hooves off the ground at any one time during a gallop. And Edward Muybridge came up with this way of solving the debate by taking pictures of the motion of the gallop and putting them all together so you could see the motion of the gallop, and proved that all four hooves do come off the ground at one time. But again, this is 24 separate pictures being flipped through, not unlike writing drawing a little stick figure in your corner of your notebook and flipping through it so it makes it look like it's moving as you flip through your notebook. It doesn't tell a story. It was not seen by audiences. He gave lectures on this, talked about motion, talked about photography. He didn't think of himself as a cinematographer. He thought of himself as a scientist. But some people do credit him with making the very first movie. Certainly it's a motion picture. It's a picture in motion, I guess we could call it, but I'll let you debate that yourselves. Here's another one. Louis Le Prince, or Louis Le Prince, if you don't want to be all Frenchy about it, took his relatives out into the garden, told them to walk around, and used a single lens camera that took multiple shots, multiple exposures on a film, a strip of film that was run through the camera, and produced this little, it's 3-second long moving picture. And many people credit this as being the very first movie because it was shot on a single lens film, and it was a single lens camera and on a single film of photographic paper. But it doesn't tell a story, and once again, it was not seen in theaters. No audiences saw this. This was a neat trick, an invention. He showed it to his friends. He showed it to other scientists. This was seen in, there was no way of projecting this on a screen. You had to look through it through a special machine that he invented. Note that he's using Kodak paper to create this. So he's using celluloid film paper. But again, many people credit Louis Le Prince as being the very first person to make a movie. And here it is, in all its glory. Another advancement, William Dickson, an immigrant to the United States, working for the Thomas Edison Company. He used socketed film. So this is a new technology. That is, the sockets are the little holes in the sides of the film, and those have gears in them that run the film through the camera so that it can move the film quickly and stop it so the exposure can take place and then move it again quickly. And that really quick juddering of the film through the camera was one of the big problems with movie technology to begin with. It was finding a medium that could withstand the forces that were required to move it quickly and stop it, move it quickly and stop it. Well, celluloid film with sockets in it worked very well. So William Dixon is credited with developing the first true movie camera that was a feasible movie camera. But Edison and Dixon, Edison patented the kinetograph. That was the actual camera that you used to capture this, and he also patented the kinetoscope, which was the machine used to view it. This was not projected on a screen. You would sit in front of a box, and then you would put your head over the top of the box. There was a lens on top of the box. You'd look into it, and the light would come on, and you'd watch a minute-long clip of various things. This was a popular dance at the time called the butterfly dance. But you could watch people boxing, you could watch horse races, you could watch all kinds of different things on the kinetoscope. But again, Edison didn't see this in terms of telling a story. It wasn't about the art form. It was more about a nifty trick that he thought people would pay some money to watch. All right, one more step in the various technologies and techniques that develop into what we call a movie today. This is a short clip that was shown by the Lumiere brothers, Auguste and Louis Lumiere, again Frenchmen, who came up with the technique of taking a film, that is a strip of photographs, and projecting it onto a screen so that a large audience could watch it all at the same time. Here's what they showed them. Audiences came in droves to watch this. Gripping, right? People leaving a factory. These are workers leaving a factory. Once again, the idea of telling a story through film had really not caught on. This was all about the fascination of seeing people moving on screen. People were fascinated by it. In fact, the Lumiere brothers put up a camera right next to a train track, and as the train came by, it looked like the train was going to hit the screen, and the audience would watch that and scream and fall over, thinking that the train was going to come through the screen and hit them. It's kind of like watching people with virtual reality goggles on today. But that's what it was for them. It was a fascinating thing to see motion on the screen. But no one was really telling a full story yet. The narrative element of movies was not developed until the early 1900s. One of the big pioneers in the art of movie making, not necessarily the technical side of movie making, but the art, is Georges Méliès, another Frenchman who saw this technology, something brand new, something that people were just kind of gawking at, and he saw it as a way to tell stories and tell it in a powerful way. And he pioneered a lot of interesting aspects of what we think of in the movies. Fades between scenes, using a studio where he could control the elements and produce the shots he wanted to create, using special effects, camera tricks, substitutions, multiple exposures, long-term exposures, all kinds of different camera tricks that he would use to create his special effects. But most importantly, in my mind anyway, is that he told a story. And I'm not going to play the whole thing here, but I'm just going to play a little clip here from one of his very famous movies, Voyage to the Moon. He takes this idea from Jules Verne. Jules Verne had written a book called From Earth to the Moon, where they build a giant cannon so big you could load people inside of it and shoot it all the way to the moon. And he takes that idea from a novel and turns it into this visual storytelling. And I'm just going to play a couple of clips so you can kind of see what he's doing. Some of the very early special effects. So I'm going to fast forward this a little bit here. Okay, well they're getting ready to get loaded into their, what is a giant bullet, a giant shell. It's going to be shot to the moon. There it is. They're making it there. The whole thing's only about 12 minutes long. You can find it on YouTube. Okay, here they are. Men of science jumping into this giant cannon. And with much fanfare, we're going to be shot to the moon here. Set to Tchaikovsky's 1812 Overture, by the way. There they go. And here's the man on the moon. He sees it coming, and he is dismayed. Did you see the fade between the scenes there? This is all part of the artistry of making movies. The moon landing, 1902. They were thinking about this stuff. Show you one last scene here. Here they are about to meet a Martian. Oh, sorry, not a Martian. A Moonshin. A moon being. So there's aliens on the moon. All this is shot in a studio with professional actors, paid actors. So George Méliès was a real pioneer in producing the art form that we call movies. There they got him. Look at that. Using stop camera tricks, they can destroy the aliens. Okay, well, I encourage you to watch the whole thing, but the important thing here is that by 1902, movies are being used to tell stories. They're being produced for audiences, and people love it. People flock to the movies, and it becomes a really powerful form of entertainment. Another couple of pioneering moments. D.W. Griffith produces Birth of a Nation in 1915. It's about the American Civil War. It's about coming back together again as a nation. It was a very well done movie. People loved it. The interesting thing about it, what makes it so historical though, is that it was 3 hours long. Voyage to the Moon was 12 minutes. These films were something that were accustomed to being viewed as intermission acts, as something, a small thing that was put into a variety show or between scenes in a play. They were the intermission entertainment. And now movies in 1915 and going forward become the feature themselves. We talk about the feature-length film. This is the invention of the feature-length film. You would go to the movie specifically to watch the movie, and maybe you'd stop this and someone would dance as the intermission act. But this is a big change. It portrays black people in a terrible light, and as it's not viewed very frequently anymore, but it has been preserved by the Academy because of its historic significance, even though it is a terribly racist film. The last person I want to talk to you about is Charlie Chaplin. In 1914, Charlie Chaplin immigrates to the United States from England. Very poor boy. He grew up acting on stage in vaudeville acts. He was a comedian. He did all kinds of physical, humorous acts. And when he came to the United States, he got into filmmaking as a character that he called the Tramp, and became the most famous character in film in the early ages of silent film. Charlie Chaplin, besides being a famous actor, he also owned his own studio and produced his own films, and was a pioneer in the art of making movies, in that he understood that the real basic unit of making a movie is not the scene, but the take. And he would use multiple cameras, take multiple takes of every single scene, so that he could edit in the best pieces and create a scene that involved multiple runs, multiple cameras, and that really changed the way movies were made. I'm going to play just a little clip here from his movie called The Kid. And you can see how talented he is at telling a story without using any kind of voice. Now, there is music played over the top of it. There's also some sound effects that would be done by a Foley artist, either at the theater right then, or it could be recorded also onto a disc and played side by side. But the sound technology and syncing up the sound to the movie was a really difficult thing to do. And in the 20s, this would all be done either with live music or maybe just a soundtrack that was played alongside it here. So the sounds you're hearing are a Foley artists that are there, well, would have been there making the sounds as part of the entertainment of being at the theater. So that's just a little clip. That it was, of course, a feature-length film, but you can see how talented Charlie Chaplin was in making a movie that tells a story without having any words to it. Now, I want you to look at the dates here. 1915 and 1914, D.W. Griffith and Charlie Chaplin. These are being done in the United States of America. So this time that Hollywood is becoming the big hub of movie making. At the same time, another big event is going on in Europe that we don't talk very much about in this course, actually. That is World War I. You notice earlier on we talked about all these Frenchmen and Englishmen who were involved in the technology of producing early film. But as World War I begins to devastate the economies and the energies of the European continent, they didn't have the wherewithal to put a lot of time and effort into entertainment type things like making movies. Over in the United States, though, they are cranking out movies over in Hollywood left and right, and they're silent, so you can transfer them over to Europe in all kinds of different languages. They cross over the language barrier very easily. They don't have to be translated or voiced over in another language. And Europeans were very happy to just import most of their movies from the States during this time period. And it's because of that that the United States becomes the real entertainment hub. That is, I should say, Hollywood becomes the real entertainment hub of the world. And still to this day is, thanks in part to World War I and the devastation that it had on the European continent. Well, starting in the 30s, actually in 1928, the first film that could integrate both sound and photography into the same strip of film was invented and used to make movies. And in the 1930s, that began to caught on like wildfire in Hollywood. In Europe and other places like India, it did not catch on very well. The Europeans saw sound as a way of it ruined the aesthetic of the film. They thought of movie making as a visual experience, not an audio-visual experience. And so the United States pioneered that technology, and it caught on, and a lot of silent movie actors and actresses faded from fame very quickly as their voices were recorded and they had thick accents. They might have been immigrants to the United States. They couldn't speak English very well, many of them. Some of them just had funny sounding voices, or their voices just didn't sound the way audiences had imagined them sounding when they were silent. And Charlie Chaplin is one of these same people. He understood that, though. He never made a movie as the Tramp that had the Tramp speak, because he knew that as soon as the Tramp spoke, he would be dead in the viewer's eyes, because he's never going to sound the way viewers thought of him as sounding. So that brings to close the first chapter in movie history, that is the beginnings of the silent film era, and the introduction of sound integration, that is sound on film technology that allowed for perfect synchronization between sound and film. And that's another fascinating set of wonderful historical movies, but I'm going to end it right there. And because we're going into now, you should be watching The Untouchables, which is occurring during the 30s here, during the Prohibition years of the 30s. Well, that's the kinds of movies that the people were going to go watch, and the types of entertainment that people were fascinated with were these new talkies, the new sound movies. So with that, I hope you enjoy The Untouchables. Have a nice night.